In the first reading today, it says, "Woe to the shepherds who destroy and scatter the sheep of my pasture." The other day, I ran into somebody, never met them before, but they told me about their journey and how they don't go to church anymore. 65 years old and came from a Mennonite background in Steinbach, Manitoba. And that's where most of the Mennonites live, Steinbach, Manitoba. And there's many different groups of Mennonites, even in Steinbach, Manitoba. And her group, her family belonged to a ultra-conservative Mennonite group called the Church of God in Christ. And I went on the internet and looked at it. And she and her 3 siblings in their 20s broke away from the group. And they could see that this is not what they were called to be, and they broke away. And unfortunately, this church group, much like many others, practice shunning. Any church that practices shunning has got a sore spot in my heart and soul for those people. Shunning is when it's part of their practice, you no longer talk to the people. They're not welcome to come to church. They're absolutely not welcome to come to communion. And in those families, you can't sit at the same table and have a meal together. Fortunately, her family set up 2 tables, put up 1 tablecloth over the 2 of them, and they sat together. Very gracious way to deal with it. But when I read this lesson this morning, I thought of that. Woe to you shepherds who cause my sheep to scatter. Woe to you pastors who do things so difficult that it causes people to give up on their faith and to leave the church. And I could probably give you 50 or 100. You want me to give them all to you? Over the years, you hear lots of stories. And I pray that I have not been one, but in the course of time, it probably happens where a pastor rubs people the wrong way and they quit the church. But there are many stories about pastors doing things and saying things, and church denominations that are so strict and so hardcore that they push people away. And if you need to use shunning to bring your family back together again, you've lost. If you need the law to keep your family together, you have lost the fight. It is the gospel. It is the gospel. It is love. It is forgiveness. It is accepting all people, no matter how different they might be. That is how we stay together as one. And the stories go on and on about different denominations and different churches. And it's usually the legalism. Okay? Some churches very legalistic. If you're divorced, if you're gay, if you are not baptized, you cannot participate in the congregations anymore. Is it any surprise to any of us that churches aren't full to overflowing anymore? Is it any surprise to us that churches are closing one after the other? And if you think that trend is going to stop, it's not going to stop. And it's unfortunate that sometimes it's the shepherds who have caused these problems in people's hearts. She said she had a hard time forgiving the people involved. Forgiving her pastor, the one she was growing up with. And I said, if it's any consolation, they didn't know what they were doing. And in the gospel reading today, it's the story of Jesus on the cross. And what is it? The second last words that he spoke? Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. Some people might think that's a small consolation. I think it's a huge consolation. If you think somebody has deliberately done something to you, if they're deliberately trying to destroy your family, trying to destroy your faith, trying to push you away, that's going to hurt all the more. It's going to make you very angry, and the chances of forgiving are almost nil. If you believe as Jesus did, in the last moments of his life, that these people really don't know what they are doing, it's easier to forgive them. I came from a very conservative Lutheran background, and I shake my head that some of my classmates that I grew up with and went to school with are still involved in this church. And if I went to their church, I would not be allowed to have communion. I would be shunned from the altar. And it just makes me crazy thinking how they could have this same opinion that they were raised with 50, 60 years ago. But when this is what you are taught, and they say this is the truth, it's hard to break away. It's easier to forgive them when you believe they don't know what it is they are doing. And that's the truth in all of our relationships. Talked to somebody else this week about what's going on in their family. And the grandfather that lives on the East Coast, they don't talk to him anymore. And the granddaughter remembers a story that happened 25 years ago and how angry he was with her. And then I heard the story. I said, tell me about this person's life. Well, he left home at age 14. Anybody who leaves home at 14, do you think that's a great thing that are going on in their family at their home? Something major was happening in his life at age 14 that caused him to leave home. And if you think he's going to come out of that a normal person, a happy person, who's so loving and forgiving and just you want to be around that person, it's a very difficult journey. Forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. That's a huge difference. Most of us right away believe this person knows exactly what they're doing. They know how much pain that they are causing, and they are doing it deliberately. I see people nodding their heads. If that's what you think, the process of forgiveness will be nearly impossible. Jesus' almost his last words had to be important. They had to be significant. Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. What they are doing is the same thing that somebody did to them. It's easier to forgive. This is what we are called to as Christians.